Hey, it's Wilfer. So let's talk about Argentina, because they've just had an important round of elections, possibly their most important election of the past several decades. And by the looks of it, the results are set to change the entire future course of the country. Now, Argentina is a country with extraordinary natural wealth, a highly educated population, and some of the richest farmland on Earth. At the start of the 20th century, it ranked among the top 10 richest nations globally. Buenos Aires was once called the Paris of South America, but that was a long time ago. Since the 1950s, Argentina has endured a kind of economic curse, a repeating cycle of currency crashes, hyperinflation, and endless political resets. Governments spent more than they earned, borrowed to fill the gap, and printed money to cover the rest. Each time inflation rose, wages lost value, savings evaporated, and most tragically, the trust in the system eroded more and more with every passing election cycle. For the ordinary citizen, this pattern became a way of life. Prices changed weekly, sometimes daily. People kept US dollars hidden at home because the peso couldn't be trusted. Every few years, the government promised reform, but soon reverted to populism and short-term fixes just to convince them to give them another vote. And then, in 2021, a new figure burst onto the scene, an eccentric economist named Javier Milei. He wasn't a typical politician. He had a somewhat weird hairstyle, shouted during debates, was unapologetic about his discourse, and even carried a chainsaw to his rallies to symbolize cutting government waste. He called Argentina's ruling class la casta política, the political caste. Milei had built his career as an outspoken libertarian economist. He worshipped free markets, denounced central banking, and argued that Argentina's bloated state was suffocating growth. His language was raw and emotional. He didn't speak like a bureaucrat, but more like an angry citizen who was fed up, which for millions of frustrated Argentines definitely struck a chord. While establishment politicians blamed external forces or bad luck, Milei blamed the system itself. He argued that the welfare state had grown into a monster that consumed everything productive, rewarding dependency and punishing effort. His solution was radical: slash public spending, privatize inefficient companies, eliminate the central bank, and eventually dollarize the economy. To the political elite, it sounded insane. To many voters, it sounded like the first honest thing they'd heard in years. Now, by the time Argentina's 2023 presidential election arrived, inflation had topped 200%, one of the highest in the world. Poverty affected more than 40% of the population. People were exhausted, angry, and desperate for change. And against all odds, Milei, a man with no prior political experience, surged in the polls. His party, La Libertad Avanza, meaning freedom advances, was barely 2 years old, yet it electrified younger voters and disillusioned workers alike. When he won the presidency in November of 2023, it was nothing short of a political earthquake. The media compared him to Donald Trump, but Milei insisted he was something different. Not a nationalist populist, but a classical liberal, crusading against state corruption. At that point, it looked like the story came to some sort of a happy ending, and from there on, change was about to finally come for Argentina. However, things are always more complicated than they appear. Winning the presidency didn't mean winning control. Milei's party held only a small fraction of seats in Congress. Most of the local leadership positions belonged to traditional parties still, who viewed him as an outsider threatening their status quo. His early months in office were defined by confrontation. He announced a massive austerity plan, freezing public hiring, cutting subsidies, reducing ministries from 18 to just 9, and suspending a lot of infrastructure projects. He aimed to balance Argentina's budget, something no government had done in 2 decades. But the human cost was immediate: job losses, higher utility prices, and social unrest. The opposition accused him of dismantling the welfare state and widening inequality. Supporters countered that this was exactly what was needed: bitter medicine after decades of denial. International observers watched from the sidelines with caution. Some investors applauded his commitment to fiscal discipline, while others worried that this volatility could scare the markets. Still, despite the turbulence, Milei's message remained clear. He wasn't here to please everyone. He was here to reset the country. And that would turn out to be by no means an easy project. Throughout 2024, Milei's administration faced constant pushback. Congress blocked large parts of his reform bill. Massive protests filled Buenos Aires. The media mocked him, calling him irrational or accusing him of being authoritarian. At times, it seemed his presidency would eventually lead to nothing of substance. Approval ratings dipped, inflation remained very high, and Argentina's powerful unions were vowing to paralyze the country in his opposition. Critics said his eccentric antics alienated too many allies to govern efficiently. By all accounts, it appeared that all of his previous promises would turn into nothing more than empty words. But something unusual happened. Despite the noise, public patience held. Many Argentines, even those suffering under austerity, felt Milei was bringing some sort of change from the old broken model that had repeated for decades. By early 2025, inflation began to modestly slow down. It wasn't the miracle turnaround everybody had hoped for, but it was a sign that maybe the pain was beginning to pay off, which leads us to the midterm elections that just took place. Half of the Chamber of Deputies and a third of the Senate were up for election. For Milei, this was the chance to transform a fragile presidency into a governing mandate. If his coalition gained enough seats, he could finally pass his reforms without the endless obstruction. Opposition parties warned that giving Milei more power would destroy the social safety net and sell the country to foreign investors. As the economy showed the first hints of stabilization, the narrative shifted. Milei positioned himself as the man who took the hard road, the one willing to endure political pain to secure a better future. He framed the election as a moral choice, courage and change versus decay. And on October 26, 2025, Milei's party won by a landslide, taking over 40% of the votes. For the first time since taking office, Javier Milei now holds real power. His party and his allies command a clear majority in Congress. Despite the austerity, it looks like Argentines chose to double down on reform. And this kind of result is very rare. Most leaders who impose painful economic measures are punished at the polls, which is why populism was always the low-hanging fruit. Milei defied that logic somehow. His victory shows that a critical mass of Argentines is ready to face short-term hardship for long-term recovery. And this opens the door for major structural changes. But politically, it's also a gamble. Now that he's no longer the underdog, he can no longer blame obstruction for slow progress. The results will rest entirely on him. The public that empowered him will also hold him accountable. If he delivers, he could become the first Argentine leader in generations to truly stabilize the economy. If he fails, his experiment could end in ruin. To grasp why this moment feels so important, we have to understand how deeply Argentina's crises have shaped its identity. Inflation over there isn't just an economic issue, it seems to be a psychological one. It has eroded trust, it distorts behavior, and makes planning impossible. Businesses avoid long-term investments, families rush to spend their paychecks before prices rise again. A culture of short-term survival replaces one of stability and growth. By handing Milei a clear win, Argentines are in essence declaring war against that fatalism. They're choosing discipline over being complacent with what they've always known. A freer economy might finally break this cycle of dependency that the country has seen for so long. And if Milei succeeds, it could reshape Latin America's political map. His win will embolden other reformist movements across the region and perhaps the world, especially in countries struggling with similar problems: high inflation, debt, and distrust of the political elite. With all of that said, however, if Javier Milei's experiment goes wrong and all of the austerity measures trigger some sort of social collapse, it could very well become a cautionary tale rather than an example. The truth is, just like after winning the presidency, this too is by no means a finish line for him. Milei faces enormous challenges. Inflation has slowed but remains one of the highest in the world, poverty remains widespread in Argentina, and trust in politics is so fragile over there that a single misstep could easily create unrest yet again. Still, no matter how things unfold, October 2025 will probably remain a defining moment in Argentina's history. It's a long overdue chance to cut loose from the same policies that have kept Argentina trapped. And as someone from Eastern Europe, where we face many of the same problems, this has been a very inspiring example to see unfold. And the coming years will test whether this courage and defiance can translate into results as well. No one knows for sure, obviously, but it will be fascinating to see what the future brings, and how Argentina's evolution from here will ripple out into the rest of the global stage. What's also interesting, by the way, is that Japan has also recently appointed a new prime minister who seems to be focused on major reforms as well. I made a video just recently about the tragic demographic decline that Japan is facing, and why for them it may already be too late to turn things around. Check out the video up here for more on that. I'll see you in the next one.